What if the only thing standing between you and wealth is the fact that you've been trying too hard to get it? Think about that for a second. You've read the books. You've set the goals. You've told yourself, this year is different. And yet, here you are, still watching, still searching, still feeling like something is missing. I know that feeling, not because someone told me about it, because I lived inside it for years. And here's what I discovered. The people who actually build wealth don't chase it. They don't force it. They don't even think about it the way you and I were taught to think about it. They're addicted, not to money, not to success as a concept. They're addicted to doing certain things, specific things, things that, over time, make wealth almost inevitable. Napoleon Hill spent 20 years studying the richest minds in America. And what he found wasn't a strategy. It wasn't a morning routine. It was something much quieter than that. That's what this video is about. Let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself. When was the last time you spent an entire hour doing something that genuinely moved your life forward? Not scrolling, not planning to plan, not watching someone else build something. Actually doing the thing. If that question made you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is information. Here's what most people don't realize. Addiction isn't the problem. Addiction is neutral. It's a mechanism, a loop that your brain builds over time based on what you feed it. The same way someone becomes addicted to checking their phone, a person can become addicted to building, creating, producing, growing. The difference between the person who stays stuck and the person who quietly accumulates wealth isn't discipline. It's not willpower. It's not even intelligence. It's what they've trained their brain to crave. Napoleon Hill called it a burning desire. But I think that phrase has been misunderstood for decades. People hear burning desire, and they think emotion. They think motivation. They think that feeling you get on January 1st when you write down your goals with a brand new pen. That's not what he meant. Hill spent 2 decades inside the homes, the offices, the minds of men like Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison. And what he noticed wasn't that these men were more motivated than everyone else. What he noticed was that they couldn't stop. Not because they were forcing themselves, because something had been rewired. They had built, whether consciously or not, an addiction to the process, not to the result, to the process. And that changes everything. Because motivation fades, willpower runs out. But an addiction follows you into Monday morning. It follows you when you're tired. It follows you when nobody's watching. The question isn't whether you want to be rich. Of course you do. The question is what your brain is currently addicted to, and whether that addiction is building your future or quietly dismantling it. Because right now, in this moment, your brain is running a loop. Every single day, and most people never stop to ask what that loop is actually producing. There's a story Napoleon Hill tells that most people skip over. It's not the famous one about Carnegie. It's not the one about Ford refusing to be called ignorant in court. It's a quieter story, almost easy to miss. Hill describes a man who had failed at every business he ever started. Lost money, lost time, lost the respect of people around him. By conventional standards, this man was a failure, multiple times over. But Hill noticed something. Every single time this man fell, he got back up faster. Not because he was optimistic, not because he had some unshakable belief in himself, but because he had built a mental habit so deep, so grooved into his daily existence, that moving forward wasn't a decision anymore. It was just what he did. Hill called this definiteness of purpose. But here's what that phrase actually means when you strip away the formality of it. It means your brain has a default direction. When life pushes you sideways, your default direction pulls you back. Not through effort, through habit, through architecture. Think of it this way. Imagine 2 houses. They look similar from the outside. Same neighborhood, same size, roughly the same age. But one of them was built on a solid foundation. The other was built on soft ground. When the storm comes, and the storm always comes, one house shifts. Cracks appear. The structure starts to compromise itself. The other house stands. Not because it's stronger in any dramatic way, but because of what's underneath. Your mind works the same way. Most people spend their entire lives decorating the surface. Better habits, better routines, better morning rituals. And those things matter. But if the foundation isn't right, none of it holds when pressure arrives. The foundation Hill was talking about is this: knowing, with absolute clarity, what you are building. And why. Not in a vague, aspirational sense. Not, I want to be successful, or I want financial freedom. Those are decorations. I mean something much more specific, much more personal. The kind of clarity that doesn't need a vision board because it lives inside you like a compass needle that never stops pointing north. And here's what that clarity does to your brain over time. It begins to filter reality. The opportunities that used to be invisible start to appear. Not because the world changed. Because your reticular activating system, the part of your brain that decides what's worth noticing, has been given a target. Hill understood this before neuroscience had the language to explain it. He called it the subconscious mind working in your favor. Today, we'd call it cognitive priming. Different words, same phenomenon. But here's what neither Hill nor modern science fully prepares you for. Clarity alone isn't enough. You can know exactly what you want. You can have perfect definiteness of purpose and still go nowhere. Because there's a second layer, a layer that most people never reach. And it has nothing to do with knowing what you want. It has everything to do with who you become while you're pursuing it. Here's something that took me a long time to understand. You don't get rich by doing rich things. You get rich by becoming someone for whom rich things are natural. Read that again, slowly, because there's a difference, a profound difference. And most people spend their entire lives on the wrong side of it. They focus on the actions, the investments, the businesses, the strategies, the habits. And those things matter, they genuinely do. But actions without identity are like seeds planted in concrete. The effort is real. The intention is real. The result never comes. Napoleon Hill saw this clearly. He wrote about it in a way that most readers gloss over because it sounds almost too simple. He said that every person who achieves lasting wealth goes through a transformation that has nothing to do with money. It's a transformation of self-concept, of how they see themselves when nobody is watching, of what they believe they deserve when they're completely alone with their thoughts. Think about someone you know or know of who grew up with very little and built something significant. Not someone who won the lottery, not someone who inherited, someone who built. Really think about them. What changed first? The money or the person? It's always the person. Always. And this isn't philosophy. This is mechanics. Because your behavior, every single day, flows from your identity. Not from your goals. Not from your plans. From who you believe yourself to be at the deepest level. If you believe, somewhere underneath all your ambition, that wealth is for other people, that people like you don't really make it, that success is something that happens to the lucky ones, the connected ones, the ones who started with advantages you didn't have, then every strategy you apply is fighting against that current. And the current always wins. Eventually, Hill called this the subconscious saboteur, the voice that agrees with your goals on the surface but undermines them in the dark, in the small decisions, in the moments where nobody would know the difference. The person who leaves the networking event early because they feel out of place. The person who underprices their work because they don't feel worth more. The person who starts the business but never really launches it because launching means risking real judgment. These aren't strategy failures. They're identity failures. So how do you change it? How do you actually shift who you are at that level? Hill's answer was specific, and it's one of the most misunderstood concepts in all of his work. He said you act as if, not pretend, not fake it. Act as if. There's a difference, and it matters enormously. Pretending is performance. It's exhausting. It collapses the moment real pressure arrives. Acting as if is something else entirely. It's making decisions from the future version of yourself. Asking not what you feel like doing, but what the person you're becoming would do. In this meeting, in this moment, with this opportunity. Over time, that gap between who you are and who you're acting as begins to close. Not because you fooled yourself, Because you gave your brain enough evidence to update its beliefs. Identity shifts through evidence, through repeated action, through becoming, gradually and then suddenly, someone for whom wealth is not a destination but a natural expression of who they are. And when that happens, something else changes too. Something in how you spend your time. Something in what you find yourself drawn to. Something that starts to look, from the outside, like discipline or focus or work ethic. But from the inside, it feels like something completely different. It feels like craving. If this is resonating with something deep inside you, I want you to do one thing right now. Go to the comments and write the word wealth mindset. Not because it's a ritual, not because of any mystical reason, but because the act of declaring where you're headed, even in a comment section, is your identity speaking out loud. It's evidence, and your brain is always collecting evidence about who you are. Write it, and watch what happens in the next few days. Pay attention, really pay attention. Let me tell you about Thomas Edison. Not the version you learned in school, not the light bulb, not the phonograph, not the genius inventor who changed the world. I want to tell you about the man behind those things. The daily reality of who Edison actually was. Edison slept 4 hours a night. Not because he was disciplined. Not because he had some optimized sleep protocol. He slept 4 hours because he couldn't stop. His mind, when left alone, immediately returned to the problem in front of him. To the experiment. To the question that hadn't been answered yet. His colleagues described working with him as both inspiring and unsettling. Because Edison didn't experience work the way most people do. He didn't drag himself to the lab. He didn't need motivation. He didn't count down the hours until the weekend. He was addicted, genuinely, deeply addicted to the process of figuring things out. And here's what most people miss about Edison's story. He wasn't born that way. Nobody is born that way. That addiction was built, layer by layer, decision by decision, through years of feeding a particular kind of curiosity until it became something his brain couldn't live without. Napoleon Hill studied Edison directly, spent time with him, observed him, and what Hill concluded wasn't that Edison was exceptional in his intelligence or his creativity. What Hill concluded was that Edison had mastered something specific, something learnable, something that anyone, with the right understanding, could cultivate. He called it organized effort fueled by obsession. But what he was really describing was a feedback loop. Here's how the loop works. You do something that moves toward what you're building. Your brain registers a small win, not a big dramatic victory, a small one. The satisfaction of a problem solved, a sentence written, a call made, a number improved, something that tells your nervous system, that worked. That signal, that small chemical reward, makes you slightly more likely to do the same thing again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Over weeks, this becomes preference. You find yourself drawn to it. Over months, it becomes habit. You do it without thinking. Over years, it becomes identity. You are someone who does this. It's not effort anymore. It's just who you are. This is exactly how destructive addictions work. The mechanism is identical. The only difference is what you're feeding into the loop. Most people feed distraction into the loop. Comfort, avoidance, the temporary relief of not doing the hard thing. And their brain builds a craving for exactly that. For the scroll, for the escape, for the numbing. And they wonder why building wealth feels so hard. Why they can never seem to stay consistent. Why the motivation always fades. It's not a character flaw. It's not laziness. It's not that they don't want it badly enough. It's that they've been feeding the wrong loop. For years. Sometimes for decades. And the brain, which is extraordinarily loyal to whatever loop you've built, keeps delivering exactly what you've trained it to deliver. But here's what Hill understood, and what neuroscience has since confirmed in ways that would have fascinated him. The loop can be interrupted. The craving can be redirected. The addiction can be rebuilt. Not overnight. Not through willpower alone, but through something far more reliable than willpower. Through environment. Through design. Through the deliberate construction of conditions that make the right loop easier to enter than the wrong one. Edison didn't rely on motivation. He built a lab. He surrounded himself with people who were as obsessed as he was. He created a physical and social environment where the productive loop was the path of least resistance. And that's the part of the story that never gets told. Because everyone wants to talk about the genius. Nobody wants to talk about the architecture, the invisible structure that made the genius possible. But that architecture is where everything actually lives. That's where the real work happens. And that's where most people, even the ones who want it badly, never think to look. Until now, most people think environment is decoration. The city you live in, the office you work from, the desk where you sit every morning. They think of these things the way they think of wallpaper, aesthetic choices, background noise, things that matter less than the real work happening in front of them. But Napoleon Hill didn't think that way, and neither did any of the men he studied. Hill noticed something early in his research that quietly changed the entire direction of his work. He noticed that the wealthiest, most productive people he encountered didn't just have better habits. They had better surroundings. Not better in terms of luxury, better in terms of function. In terms of what those surroundings made them feel, think, and do automatically, without conscious effort. Carnegie's offices were designed to make collaboration feel inevitable. Ford's factories were structured so that momentum was built into the physical space itself. Edison's laboratory, as we just talked about, was less a workplace and more a machine for generating obsession. These men understood something that most people never stop to consider. Your environment is always speaking to you. Every single moment of every single day. It's telling you what to do next, what to reach for, what to ignore, what matters and what doesn't. And if you haven't designed that environment deliberately, then something else has designed it for you. The algorithm, the advertiser, the path of least resistance, the accumulated noise of a world that profits enormously from your distraction. Think about your own environment right now, not just your physical space, though that matters deeply. Think about your information environment. What are you consuming every morning before your mind has fully woken up? What voices are living inside your head rent-free? Whose version of reality are you absorbing so consistently that it has started to feel like your own? Hill called this the mastermind principle, the idea that the minds you surround yourself with become, over time, part of your own mind. Not metaphorically, functionally. The way you think, the way you evaluate opportunity, the way you respond to setback, all of it is shaped by the mental company you keep. And this works in both directions. Surround yourself with people who are building, and your baseline definition of normal shifts upward. What seemed ambitious starts to feel achievable. What felt like risk starts to feel like standard operating procedure. Your brain recalibrates to match the environment. Surround yourself with people who are stuck, and the opposite happens. Slowly, quietly, without anyone meaning any harm, your ceiling lowers. Your tolerance for inaction grows. The excuses that once felt thin start to feel reasonable. This isn't judgment. It's mechanics. Hill was ruthless about this in his own life. He made deliberate, sometimes painful decisions about whose company he kept, not because he was cold or elitist, because he understood that his mind was his most valuable asset. And like any valuable asset, it required protection. Now here's where this gets practical, because I don't want this to stay abstract. You may not be able to change your city tomorrow. You may not be able to walk away from every relationship that isn't serving your growth. Real life is complicated. People have obligations, histories, love for people who aren't on the same path. But you can change your information environment starting today. Right now, this week. You can decide what the first voice you hear in the morning is. You can decide what ideas are living in your head during your commute. You can decide which conversations you're choosing to enter and which ones you're quietly stepping away from. These seem like small decisions. They are not small decisions. Over months and years, they are the decisions that determine whether your brain builds a craving for growth or a craving for comfort. Because your brain will build a craving for whatever it's consistently exposed to. That's not a theory. That's just how the human nervous system works. And the people who understand this, who take it seriously, who actually redesign their environment instead of just resolving to try harder, those are the people who stop needing motivation, because they've made the right thing the easy thing. And the right thing, done easily and consistently, is the only real path to anything worth building. But environment alone isn't the complete picture. There's something else, something internal, a specific kind of mental practice that Hill returned to again and again across his entire body of work. Something that sounds almost too simple when you first hear it, but that changes everything when you actually understand what it does to the brain. There's a chapter in Think and Grow Rich that most people read too fast. They get to it, they nod along, they think they understand it, and they move on. And in moving on, they miss the single most important practical tool in the entire book. Hill called it autosuggestion, and I know what happens when people hear that word. Their eyes glaze over slightly. It sounds dated. It sounds like something from another era, before we understood how the brain actually works. It sounds, if we're being honest, a little strange. But stay with me, because what Hill was describing, stripped of the early 20th century language, is something that modern neuroscience has not only validated, but considers foundational to how human behavior actually changes. Here's what autosuggestion actually is. It's the deliberate, repeated feeding of specific information to your subconscious mind. Not affirmations in the way most people understand them. Not standing in front of a mirror telling yourself you're wealthy when you feel broke. That's performance. That's decoration. What Hill was describing is something more precise, more intentional, more demanding. He was describing the practice of holding a clear, emotionally charged mental image of what you are building and returning to that image so consistently, with such regularity, that your subconscious mind begins to accept it as reality. Not as a goal, as reality. And when the subconscious accepts something as reality, it begins to work toward it automatically. Not consciously, not through effort, through the same invisible machinery that keeps your heart beating and your lungs breathing without you having to think about it. Hill wrote that the subconscious mind cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. Neuroscience now confirms this. The same neural pathways fire whether you are physically doing something or mentally rehearsing it with enough clarity and emotional intensity. Athletes have known this for decades. The visualization practices of Olympic competitors aren't motivational exercises. They're neurological training. They are literally building the neural architecture of peak performance before the performance happens. Hill understood this intuitively. He applied it to wealth, to business, to the construction of a life. And the men he studied applied it daily. Not occasionally, not when they felt like it. Daily. Carnegie had a practice of what he called mental picturing. Ford spoke about the power of holding an idea so firmly that it begins to pull you forward rather than you pushing toward it. Edison described his best ideas as things he received rather than invented, as though his mind had been prepared to recognize them through years of focused attention. These weren't spiritual claims. These were practical observations from men who had discovered, through direct experience, that the mind prepared in a specific way operates differently from the mind left to its own default patterns. Now here's where most people make the critical mistake when they try to apply this. They do it once, or twice, or for a week, and when the result doesn't appear immediately, they conclude that it doesn't work, that it's too simple, that real results require something more dramatic. But that's exactly backwards. The power of autosuggestion isn't in the single session. It's in the accumulation. It's in the daily return to the same image, the same feeling, the same internal reality, until the repetition has done what repetition always does. Until it has built a groove. And grooves, once deep enough, become the path your mind travels automatically. Without instruction, without effort, without you having to remember to try. Think about the last time you drove a familiar route and arrived without remembering the journey. Your conscious mind was elsewhere, but something deeper, something trained through repetition, handled the navigation perfectly. That's the groove. And when your subconscious has a groove pointed toward wealth, toward building, toward the specific life you are constructing, it begins to navigate in that direction even when your conscious mind is occupied elsewhere. Even when you're tired, even when you're discouraged, even when the results haven't arrived yet. But there's something Hill added to this practice that almost nobody talks about. A specific ingredient without which the whole thing loses most of its power. He was almost insistent about it. He returned to it in chapter after chapter, in different language, from different angles, as though he was afraid his readers would miss it. And most of them did. Hill called it faith. And I want to be careful here, because that word carries a lot of weight, a lot of history, a lot of different meanings depending on who you are and where you came from. Hill wasn't talking about religion. He wasn't talking about blind optimism. He wasn't telling you to ignore reality or pretend that problems don't exist. He was talking about something far more specific, far more operational. He defined faith as the visualization of and belief in the attainment of desire, which sounds formal. So let me translate it into something more immediate. Faith, the way Hill meant it, is the ability to act on something before you have proof that it works. That's it. That's the whole thing. And when you understand it that way, you start to see why most people never build the life they're capable of building. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack opportunity, but because they've made proof a prerequisite for action. They want to see the result before they fully commit to the process. They want the guarantee before they make the investment. They want certainty before they take the risk. And life doesn't work that way. It has never worked that way. For anyone. Think about every significant thing you've ever done. Every relationship you committed to. Every job you took. Every city you moved to. Every business you started or considered starting. At the moment of decision, you didn't have proof it would work. You had information, yes. You had intuition. You had hope. But not proof. Proof only comes after the action, never before. And the people who understand this, who have genuinely internalized it, who have made peace with the discomfort of acting without certainty, those people have access to an entirely different set of possibilities than the people who are still waiting for the guarantee. Hill observed this across every single person he studied. Every one of them had a moment, usually multiple moments, where they acted without proof, where they committed fully to something that had no guarantee attached to it, where they moved forward on faith alone. And here's what he noticed about those moments. They weren't comfortable, even for Carnegie, even for Ford, even for the men who eventually built some of the largest fortunes in American history. The discomfort was real. The uncertainty was real. The risk was real. But they had developed something that made action possible in spite of all of that. A relationship with uncertainty that was different from most people's relationship with it. Not fearless. That's not the right word. Fearless implies the absence of fear. What these men had was something more useful than the absence of fear. They had the willingness to act alongside it. Hill wrote that faith is a state of mind that may be induced by affirmation or repeated instructions to the subconscious mind, which sounds technical, but what he was really saying is this. You can train yourself to act without proof. It's not a personality trait you either have or don't have. It's a capacity that's built through practice, through small acts of commitment repeated until your nervous system stops treating uncertainty as a threat. Think about learning to drive. The first time you got on a highway, your body was flooded with signals that said this is dangerous, slow down, pull over, you're not ready. Your heart rate elevated, your grip tightened, your attention narrowed to a point. And then, over time, through repetition, your nervous system recalibrated. The highway stopped feeling like a threat, not because it became less real, because you had accumulated enough experience to normalize it. Faith works the same way. You build it by taking small actions before you're certain, by making small commitments without guarantees, by surviving the discomfort of uncertainty enough times that your brain stops treating it as a signal to stop and starts treating it as a signal that you're moving. But here's the part that changes everything. The part that connects faith back to the addiction we've been talking about throughout this entire conversation. When you combine faith with the right environment and the right mental practice, something begins to happen that Hill described, but that I think deserves more direct language than he gave it. You stop needing external motivation. Completely. Not partially. Completely. Because you've built something internal that's more reliable than motivation, more durable than inspiration, more consistent than any feeling you could chase from the outside. You've built a pull, a direction, a gravitational force inside your own psychology that draws you toward the work the way gravity draws everything downward. Quietly, consistently, without drama. And that pull, once established, doesn't care what day of the week it is. It doesn't care whether you slept well. It doesn't care whether the market is up or down or whether someone discouraged you yesterday. It just pulls. But building that pull requires one more thing. Something that Hill addressed directly and that almost every reader of his work underestimates because it sounds too straightforward to be important. It has to do with decisions. Specifically, a certain kind of decision that wealthy people make differently from everyone else. Not bigger decisions. Not bolder decisions. A specific quality of decision that most people have never been taught to make. Hill made a list once. It wasn't a famous list. It didn't end up on motivational posters or get quoted in commencement speeches. But in the context of his research, it might be the most important list he ever compiled. He analyzed the financial histories of hundreds of people across decades. People who built wealth and people who didn't. People who started with nothing and accumulated everything. And people who started with everything and ended with nothing. And he looked for patterns. Real patterns. Not the obvious ones. And one of the clearest patterns he found had nothing to do with intelligence or opportunity or timing or luck. It had to do with how people made decisions. Specifically, he noticed that people who built lasting wealth made decisions quickly and changed them slowly. And people who stayed stuck, regardless of how smart they were or how much they wanted to succeed, made decisions slowly and changed them quickly. Read that again, because it's worth sitting with. Decide quickly, change slowly. That's not impulsiveness. That's not recklessness. Hill was careful to make that distinction. He wasn't describing people who acted without thinking. He was describing people who had done the thinking, who had developed clarity about their direction, and who, from that clarity, were able to commit without the prolonged agony of deliberation that paralyzes most people. And then, once committed, they stayed committed. Through doubt, through difficulty, through the inevitable period where results haven't arrived yet, and everything inside you is suggesting that maybe you were wrong. They stayed. Now think about your own pattern. Be honest with yourself, because this is the kind of question that's easy to answer theoretically, but much harder to answer truthfully. How long does it typically take you to decide on something that matters? Something real. Something with stakes attached to it. Do you move toward it, or do you circle it? Do you commit, or do you keep your options open, just in case? Because keeping options open feels safer than choosing? And once you've decided, how long do you stay decided? When the first obstacle appears, when the first result fails to materialize on the timeline you imagined, when someone you respect expresses doubt, how quickly does your commitment soften? These aren't comfortable questions. I'm not asking them to make you feel bad. I'm asking them because the answers tell you something specific about where you currently are and what needs to change. Hill observed that slow decisions and fast reversals create a particular kind of internal experience, a kind of chronic uncertainty about your own direction, a background hum of unresolved commitment that drains energy you could be using to build. Because every unmade decision is an open loop, and your brain hates open loops. It allocates resources to them. It returns to them at night. It runs them in the background while you're trying to focus on something else. The person with 17 unmade decisions is not just indecisive. They are cognitively taxed. Their mental bandwidth is being consumed by all those open loops simultaneously. And what's left for actual building, for the focused, sustained attention that wealth creation requires, is whatever's left over after all those loops have taken their share, which is often not enough. The wealthy people Hill studied had fewer open loops. Not because they had simpler lives, because they closed loops faster. They decided, they committed, they moved. And in moving, they freed up the mental resources that indecision was consuming. This is why decisiveness feels like momentum, not metaphorically, literally. When you close a loop, something releases. Something that was quietly draining you stops draining you. And that energy goes somewhere. It goes into the work, into the focus, into the building. But here's the nuance that Hill added, and it's important. Deciding quickly doesn't mean deciding blindly. The people he studied weren't impulsive. They were prepared. They had done the internal work of knowing their direction so clearly that when a decision needed to be made, the answer was usually already there, waiting. It just needed to be spoken. Definiteness of purpose, that concept we talked about earlier, isn't just about motivation. It's a decision-making infrastructure. When you know with clarity what you're building and why, most decisions stop being hard. They become obvious. They answer themselves. Should I take this meeting? Does it move toward the thing I'm building or away from it? Should I make this investment? Does it align with where I'm going or does it distract from it? Should I spend time on this or that? Same question, same filter, same answer, quickly arrived at, because the foundation is already there. And over time, this speed and clarity of decision-making does something to your psychology that goes beyond efficiency. It builds confidence, real confidence, not the performed kind that collapses under pressure, the quiet, durable kind that comes from a track record of commitments kept, from the accumulated evidence that you are someone who decides and follows through. And that confidence, that specific quality of self-trust, feeds directly back into the loop we've been building throughout this entire conversation. Because a person who trusts themselves makes better decisions. And better decisions create better results. And better results deepen the craving for the process that produced them. The loop tightens. The addiction deepens. Not to money, to building, to moving, to the specific, irreplaceable feeling of a life being constructed with intention. But there's one more layer to this. One more piece that Hill returned to with a kind of quiet insistence that I've always found telling. As though he knew it was the piece most likely to be dismissed. Most likely to be intellectualized without being applied. It has to do with other people. Specifically, with a particular kind of relationship that Hill considered not optional but essential. Not helpful but foundational. A relationship most people never fully develop, and whose absence quietly limits everything else. There's a principle Hill returned to more consistently than almost any other in his entire body of work. He called it the mastermind. And like so many of his concepts, the name has been borrowed, diluted, turned into a product, sold as a group coaching program, reduced to something that fits on a landing page. Which is unfortunate, because what Hill was actually describing is something far more profound than a networking group or a weekly accountability call. He was describing a specific kind of human alliance, one built not on convenience or proximity or shared profession, but on shared purpose, on mutual commitment to something larger than any individual member of the alliance could build alone. Hill defined it precisely. The coordination of knowledge and effort between two or more people who work toward a definite purpose in a spirit of harmony. Every word in that definition matters. Coordination, not just proximity, not just knowing each other. Active, deliberate coordination of what each person knows and does. Harmony, not agreement on everything, not the absence of friction, but a genuine alignment of direction. A shared North Star that keeps the alliance oriented even when individuals within it disagree on method or approach. And definite purpose. That phrase again. Always that phrase. Because without it, every other element collapses. A group of people without a shared definite purpose isn't a mastermind. It's just a social arrangement. Now here's what Hill observed when these conditions were genuinely met. When real harmony existed around real purpose between people who were genuinely coordinating. Something emerged that couldn't be explained by simply adding up the individual contributions. He described it as a third mind. a collective intelligence that exceeded what any member of the group could access alone. Not mystically, practically, through the cross-pollination of perspective, through the way one person's blind spot is another person's area of clarity, through the creative friction of minds that trust each other enough to push back honestly. Carnegie built his entire empire on this principle. He was famously clear about it. He said he knew nothing about the steel business in the technical sense. What he knew was how to surround himself with people who did, and how to create the conditions under which those people could do their best work together. That wasn't modesty. That was strategy. Deliberate, sophisticated, and extraordinarily effective strategy. Ford applied the same principle in a different way. He assembled minds around him that compensated for his limitations. And he was honest about his limitations in a way that most people never are, because most people believe that admitting limitation is the same as admitting weakness. It isn't. It's the opposite. Knowing what you don't know and actively seeking out people who fill that gap is one of the most sophisticated cognitive moves a person can make. It requires a level of self-awareness that ego usually prevents, and it produces results that solo effort, no matter how talented or disciplined, simply cannot match. But Hill went further than just advocating for collaboration. He made a specific claim that I want to sit with for a moment, because it's the kind of claim that sounds like poetry until you've experienced it directly. And then it sounds like the most obvious thing in the world. He said that no two minds ever come together without a third, invisible force being created. Not three people, two, and something that didn't exist before they connected. I've thought about this a lot, and I think what Hill was pointing at is something we've all experienced, but rarely named. That conversation where an idea emerged that neither person could have arrived at alone. That partnership where both people became, in some real and measurable way, more than they were separately. That friendship or collaboration or mentorship where the presence of the other person changed not just what you did, but who you were capable of being. That's the third mind. That's what he meant. And the reason this matters to everything we've been talking about, to the addiction to building, to the identity shift, to the decisiveness, to the environmental design, is this. No loop is stronger than a shared loop. The craving we've been building throughout this conversation, that pull toward the work, toward the process, toward the life being constructed with intention, that craving is amplified enormously when it exists within a relationship. When someone else is building alongside you. When someone else's belief in the direction reinforces your own on the days when yours is thin. Because there will be days when yours is thin. There will be mornings when the pull is quieter than usual. When the doubt is louder. When the gap between where you are and where you're going feels less like a journey and more like a distance. On those days, the environment matters. The mental practice matters. The decisiveness matters. But the people matter most. Not because they motivate you. Not because they hold you accountable in some transactional way. But because their presence, their shared commitment, their belief in the direction becomes part of your own belief. Hill was insistent that the mastermind wasn't optional for anyone serious about building wealth at the highest level. Not helpful. Not advantageous. Not a nice addition to a solid solo strategy. Essential. And yet most people treat their relationships as they treat their environment. As background. As something that happens to them rather than something they designed deliberately. They accumulate relationships through proximity and convenience. Colleagues from work. Friends from years ago. Family by default. And they never stop to ask whether those relationships are building toward the life they want or quietly reinforcing the life they're trying to leave. This isn't about abandoning people you love. It's about being honest about what different relationships produce in you. About which conversations leave you expanded and which leave you contracted. About who makes the work feel more possible and who, without meaning to, makes it feel more distant. And then making deliberate choices about where you invest the most irreplaceable resource you have. Not money, not time, though that's close. Attention, your full, focused, unrepeatable attention. Because where your attention goes, consistently and over time, is where your life goes. And the people who have learned to direct that attention toward the right loops, the right environments, the right alliances, those people don't experience wealth as something they achieved. They experience it as something that became inevitable. But there's still something missing from this picture. Something that connects all of these elements into a single, unified practice. Something that turns everything we've talked about from interesting ideas into lived reality. And it starts with the one thing most people are most afraid of. Not failure. I know that's what you expected me to say. And failure is real. The fear of it is real. The way it stops people before they start is real and worth talking about. But that's not what I mean. The thing most people are most afraid of, the thing that sits underneath the fear of failure, underneath the procrastination, underneath the endless research and planning and preparation that never quite becomes action, is something quieter than failure. It's success. Specifically, it's the version of themselves that success would require them to become. Stay with me here, because this is subtle and it matters enormously. When you imagine the life you want to build, the wealth, the freedom, the impact, there's usually a feeling that accompanies that image. And most people assume that feeling is excitement, or desire, or hope. But if you go deeper, if you sit with the image long enough and pay attention to what's actually happening in your body when you hold it, you'll often find something else underneath those surface feelings. Discomfort, a low-grade, persistent discomfort that's hard to name but impossible to ignore once you've noticed it. And the source of that discomfort is this. The life you're imagining requires a version of you that doesn't fully exist yet. A version that makes different decisions, that holds different boundaries, that sees themselves differently, that relates to money, to time, to other people, to risk, in ways that your current self hasn't fully embodied. And becoming that version means leaving something behind. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, inevitably. The process of growth requires you to release certain things, certain self-concepts, certain stories you've been telling about yourself that feel like identity but are actually just history, certain comfortable limitations that have been with you so long they feel like personality traits. Hill wrote about this with a directness that I find striking even now. He said that one of the greatest obstacles to accumulating wealth is not the lack of opportunity or the lack of knowledge or the lack of resources. It is the attachment to a self-concept that is incompatible with wealth. He was saying that you cannot carry your current identity into a fundamentally different life. Something has to give. Something has to be released. And the releasing of it, even when it's something you consciously want to release, even when you know it's holding you back, even when you've identified it clearly and understand exactly why it needs to go, is uncomfortable in a way that logic doesn't fully resolve. Because identity isn't logic. Identity is survival. At the deepest level of your nervous system, who you believe yourself to be is the most protected thing you have. Changes to it trigger the same alarm systems as physical threat. Not metaphorically, neurologically. This is why people sabotage their own success. Not because they're self-destructive, not because they don't want it, but because at the moment success arrives or approaches closely enough to feel real, it triggers this deep protective mechanism. And the mechanism, loyal to the identity it knows, finds ways to restore the familiar, to return to the self-concept it recognizes. The business that almost works and then doesn't. The relationship that almost commits and then doesn't. The opportunity that arrives and somehow gets missed. These aren't bad luck. They're the nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Protecting the known self from the threat of fundamental change. Hill saw this pattern so consistently that he wrote about it as one of the primary reasons why most people never reach their potential. Not external obstacles. Internal protection. So what do you do with this? How do you work with a system that is, at its deepest level, trying to protect you from the very thing you're building toward? Hill's answer was gradual, deliberate exposure. Not dramatic transformation. Not the burning of boats or the radical reinvention that makes for compelling stories but rarely produces lasting change. Gradual, deliberate, consistent. You introduce the new identity in small doses. You act as the future version of yourself in contained, low-stakes situations first. You build evidence. Small evidence. Quiet evidence. The kind that accumulates below the threshold of the nervous system's alarm. A decision made from the future self instead of the current one. A boundary held that the old version would have released. A standard maintained that the previous identity would have compromised. Each one is small. Each one is almost unnoticeable in isolation. But they stack. And as they stack, the nervous system begins to update its picture of who you are. The new identity starts to feel less like a threat and more like a possibility. And then less like a possibility and more like an emerging reality. And somewhere in that process, something shifts. The discomfort doesn't disappear entirely, but it changes quality. It stops feeling like warning and starts feeling like growth. Like the specific, particular discomfort of a muscle being used in a new way. Still uncomfortable, but productive, directional, alive with the sense that something real is happening. That shift, that moment when discomfort stops meaning stop and starts meaning keep going, is one of the most important thresholds in the entire journey of building wealth. Because on the other side of it is something Hill described as a kind of psychological freedom that most people never experience. A freedom that has nothing to do with money in the bank or assets on a balance sheet. A freedom from the need for the outcome to be guaranteed before you fully commit to the process. And that freedom, that specific liberation from the demand for certainty, is what makes everything else possible. The environment design, the mental practice, the decisive commitment, the mastermind alliance. All of it requires this foundation. All of it requires you to be willing to become someone you haven't fully been yet. And here's the thing about that willingness. Once you find it, once you locate it inside yourself and learn to return to it, it becomes its own kind of addiction. The addiction to growth, to the particular aliveness of moving towards something that stretches you, to the feeling of becoming, which is different from the feeling of having arrived, in a way that most people who've experienced both will tell you is actually more satisfying. Because arrival is a moment. Becoming is a direction. And a direction, once established, never really ends. But there's still one final piece. One element that ties everything together. That makes the addiction sustainable not just for months, but for decades. That explains why some people build wealth once and lose it, while others build it and keep building it, compounding not just financially, but in every dimension of their lives. It's something Hill touched on, but never fully named. Something hiding in plain sight across his entire body of work. And it has to do with what you do with everything you build. There's a pattern that Hill noticed, but rarely spoke about directly. It appears in the margins of his research. In the observations he made about the men he studied not just at the height of their success, but across the full arc of their lives. In the distinction between the ones who built something that lasted and the ones who built something that eventually collapsed under its own weight. And the pattern is this. The people who sustained wealth, who compounded it not just financially but in terms of influence, relationships, health, meaning, those people treated everything they built as a means rather than an end. Not the money, not the business, not the reputation or the legacy or the freedom. All of it. Means. Means to what? To more building. This sounds circular at first, and in a way it is, but it's a specific kind of circle, not the closed loop of someone chasing their own tail. The expanding spiral of someone whose capacity grows with every cycle, who returns to the beginning of the loop not at the same level, but at a higher one. Carnegie is the clearest example of this. He spent the first half of his life building one of the largest fortunes in American history. And then, systematically and deliberately, he spent the second half giving it away. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because he had understood something about the nature of wealth that most people never reach. that its deepest purpose isn't accumulation. It's amplification. Amplification of what you can do, of what you can build, of what you can set in motion for people who come after you. And in that understanding, Carnegie found something that pure accumulation had never given him. A relationship with his own wealth that was generative rather than protective, that expanded rather than contracted, that made him more rather than less alive to possibility. Hill wrote about this as the principle of giving. But I want to be careful about how I frame this, because it's easy to hear that word and retreat into something that sounds like a motivational platitude. This isn't about charity as virtue. It isn't about giving because giving feels good, or because it makes you look generous, or because some cosmic ledger rewards it. It's about something more structural than that. When you hold everything you build too tightly, something happens to your psychology. A subtle but significant contraction. The focus shifts from creating to protecting, from building to defending, from growth to preservation. And preservation, while necessary in measured doses, is the enemy of the addiction we've been talking about throughout this entire conversation. Because preservation is oriented toward the past, toward what already exists, toward keeping rather than making. And the craving that builds wealth, that specific addiction to the process of growth, is entirely future-oriented. It lives in the space between where you are and where you're going. It feeds on possibility, on the gap between current reality and emerging vision. The moment you close that gap by holding too tightly to what you've accumulated, the craving loses its object. The loop has nowhere to go, and slowly, quietly, the addiction that built everything begins to turn on itself. Hill saw this in men who reached the peak of financial success and then, without the continuing forward motion of building, deteriorated in ways that had nothing to do with money. Their health declined. Their relationships suffered. Their mental sharpness dulled. Not because success had corrupted them, because they had stopped doing the thing that had made them vital. They had stopped building. The ones who didn't deteriorate, the ones who stayed sharp and engaged and alive well into the later decades of their lives, were the ones who had found ways to keep the loop going, who had understood that wealth isn't a destination you arrive at and then maintain. It's a practice you sustain by continuously finding new edges to push against, new problems to solve, new things to build. And giving, in Hill's framework, isn't separate from this. It's an extension of it. When you give, really give, from a place of genuine investment in something beyond your own accumulation, you create new loops, new problems to solve, new relationships to build, new purposes to organize around, new reasons for the craving to have somewhere to go. Carnegie's libraries weren't just philanthropy. They were building projects. The same mind that had built a steel empire turned its full attention to the problem of how to make knowledge accessible to people who couldn't afford it. Same addiction, different object, same loop, different scale. And in doing that, in giving the addiction a new and larger object, he stayed vital in a way that pure accumulation never could have sustained. Now here's what this means for you. Right now, at whatever stage you're at in this process, you don't have to wait until you've accumulated enough to give. The principle doesn't work that way. The mindset that will eventually produce real wealth isn't something you adopt after the money arrives. It's what produces the money in the first place. The question of what you're building toward, of what your wealth is meant to amplify, of what larger purpose your accumulation is in service of, that question is not a luxury for later. It's a foundational element of the architecture we've been constructing throughout this entire conversation. Because without it, the loop always hits a ceiling. The addiction always runs out of object. The craving always turns, eventually, towards something that diminishes rather than builds. But with it, with a clear sense of what you're building is ultimately for, the loop becomes theoretically infinite. There's always a larger problem to solve. Always a more significant contribution to make. Always a new edge where your capacity can be tested and expanded. Hill understood this. He spent his entire life studying wealth and never confused it with money. He knew that the men who built the most enduring fortunes were the ones who had understood, usually through hard experience, that money is a tool. The most powerful tool most people ever have access to, but a tool nonetheless. And a tool without a purpose for which it's being used is just weight. The addiction we've been building toward throughout this conversation, the craving for the process, the identity shift, the environmental design, the decisive commitment, the mastermind alliance, the willingness to become someone new, all of it culminates here. In a clear, honest, deeply personal answer to the question that underlies everything Hill ever wrote. What is all of this for? Not what do you want? Not what are your goals? Not what does success look like on paper? What is this for? Sit with that question. Don't answer it quickly. Don't answer it with what sounds right or what you think you should say. Let it find a real answer. The one that's been there quietly the whole time, waiting for you to be still enough to hear it. Because that answer is the foundation of everything. The thing underneath the architecture. The ground on which everything else is built. And when you find it, really find it, something happens that no strategy, no habit, no mental practice can produce on its own. Everything becomes clear. Not easy, clear. And clarity, as we've established from the very beginning of this conversation, is where everything starts. We've covered a lot of ground together, and I want to take a moment before we reach the end to acknowledge something. Most people who start a video like this don't make it here. They drop off in the first few minutes. They get distracted. They find something easier to watch, something that asks less of them. You stayed, and that's not nothing. That's actually everything. Because the willingness to stay, to sit with ideas that require real thought, to follow a conversation that doesn't offer easy answers or quick fixes, that willingness is itself a signal. A signal about who you are and what you're actually building toward. It tells me something about you that you may not have fully articulated to yourself yet. You're not here for motivation. You're not here for a temporary feeling that fades by Thursday. You're here because something in you knows that there's a different way to move through life. A way that's more intentional, more deliberate, more aligned with what you're actually capable of. And you're right. There is. Everything we've talked about in this video, the architecture of obsession, the identity shift, the environmental design, the quality of decision, the mastermind, the willingness to become someone new, the question of what all of this is for, none of it is theoretical. None of it is philosophy for its own sake. It's a map. An incomplete one, because all maps are incomplete, but a real one, built from the observations of a man who spent 20 years inside the minds of people who built extraordinary lives, and from the research of everyone who has taken those observations seriously in the decades since. And a map is only useful if you use it, if you actually move. Which brings me to something I want to say directly. If you've stayed with me until this point in the video, it's because you're committed to creating a life of abundance and success. That's why I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Every video here is designed to help you develop the mindset that attracts wealth, prosperity, and new opportunities every single day. Not through tricks, not through shortcuts, not through the kind of surface-level inspiration that feels good for a moment and changes nothing. Through the kind of deep, sustained, genuine engagement with ideas that actually rewire how you think, how you decide, how you see yourself, and what you believe you're capable of building. That's what this channel is. That's what every video here is designed to do. And if today's conversation moved something in you, if it shifted something even slightly, if it gave language to something you've been feeling without being able to name it, then you already know whether this is the right place for you. Subscribe. Not for me. For the version of yourself that you've been catching glimpses of throughout this entire conversation. The one who builds, who decides, who acts without waiting for certainty, who designs their environment deliberately, who chooses their alliances with intention, who keeps asking what all of this is for and stays honest about the answer. That version of you is not a fantasy. It's not a future self that lives in some distant, contingent reality where everything has finally worked out. It's who you already are, underneath everything that's been layered on top. And every video on this channel is designed to help you find your way back to that. I want to tell you something that Hill never wrote down. Something that lives between the lines of everything he did right. Something I've come to believe is the real conclusion of his 20 years of research, even though he never stated it this directly. Are you ready? The addiction was never about wealth. It was never about money or success or the accumulation of anything measurable. Those were the visible outcomes. The things you could point to and say, look, it worked. But they weren't the thing itself. The thing itself was aliveness. The specific, irreplaceable feeling of a human being operating at the full extent of their capacity. Moving towards something that matters. Building something that didn't exist before. Becoming someone they couldn't have predicted they would become. That's what Carnegie was addicted to. That's what Edison couldn't sleep through. That's what Ford kept returning to long after he had more money than he could ever spend. Not wealth. Aliveness. And here's what I want you to sit with as this video ends. You felt it before. Not maybe in the context of building wealth, but somewhere. In some moment in your life when you were so fully engaged with something that time disappeared. When the gap between who you were and what you were doing closed completely. When effort stopped feeling like effort and started feeling like expression. You know that feeling. It lives in you already. Everything we've talked about today, every principle, every layer, every question we've turned over together, all of it is pointing toward that feeling. All of it is infrastructure for returning to it. For making it not a rare accident, but a daily reality. Napoleon Hill spent 20 years asking what makes people wealthy. I think the deeper answer, the one underneath all the strategies and principles and laws of success, is this. The people who build lasting wealth are the ones who found the thing that makes them feel most alive, and then built a life around never having to stop doing it. Not a hack, not a shortcut, not a morning routine. A life, constructed deliberately, defended quietly, returned to every single day, not because discipline demands it, but because something deeper than discipline, something closer to the core of who they actually are, cannot imagine anything else. That's the addiction. That's what this whole conversation has been about. And now I want to ask you the same question Hill spent 20 years trying to answer. Not for research, not for a book, for yourself. What makes you feel most alive? Not most comfortable, not most secure, not most approved of, most alive. Because the answer to that question, if you're honest enough to find it and brave enough to build toward it, is the beginning of everything, not the destination, the beginning. And beginnings, real ones, the kind that change the direction of a life, don't announce themselves with trumpets or dramatic revelations. They arrive quietly, in a moment of stillness, after a long conversation, when something that was almost visible finally comes into focus. Maybe something like right now. If this video added something real to your life today, share it with 5 people who are ready to hear it. Not people who need motivation. People who are ready to build. And follow this channel. Because this conversation doesn't end here. It's just getting started.